There's an old saying amongst nerds that goes something like this: every model is wrong and some are useful. Today, we're going to open up the hood underneath our retirement modeling and everything that goes into our financial planning to help you understand what makes a good or better financial plan model.
Yeah, it's true that we will be in social situations or new situations, and it becomes discovered that, oh, we're financial planners. And if it's not what is the market going to do, we'll often get asked things like, well, what should I add in my 401k? How much should I be saving
Yeah,
for
so
retirement?
so either peer into a crystal ball and tell me what the future is, or tell me exactly what I need to do to retire effectively without knowing anything about my situation.
Right. Yep. And I probably come across dumbfounded because I truly never know what to say.
Well,
And
we don't really think of
it,
ourselves as magicians, but
it's like it's like asking, I don't know, a surgeon, oh, you're a surgeon. Oh, what kind of surgery should I get? "Oh, I don't know. What are you trying to fix? What's your goal? What's wrong with you?
I heard those new hips they give you now can just turn you into a superhuman no matter what, though.
Uh, so yeah, if you want a really specific answer, you need specific planning, and that's just not going to happen in a one-off social conversation,
Yeah.
typically.
Yeah, and so, I mean, it's those sort of conversations that, got this episode started of, yeah, what it's a common question people ask because everyone wants to know, like, what do I need to do to retire? Like, that's the foundational question of a
Hmm.
lot, not all, but a lot of financial planning, right? Saying, okay, I'm accumulating now, I'm distributing later. How much do I have to accumulate now so that I can distribute later? So super simple question, but really complicated answer.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to talk about it in this podcast, and yes, there's different. The words Ben just used. There's different planning when you think about accumulation, right? And some of our wealthiest top clients, they're mid 30s, so in the accumulation phase. And then there's the withdrawal phase, right? When you get to retirement. And so those are two phases that, have really specific planning. What we're going to try to do today is answer this question and look under the hood a little bit when we start to run retirement analysis, questions we would ask, different variables we would input when we're trying to build the analysis. So of course we can't we can't do it all just by talking, but we're gonna try to answer that question or give you some questions, some food for thought.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think maybe the best place to start is a story, and a story of actually a conversation I had about a year ago with a friend of mine who is a beloved DIYer. Very, very tuned into the market, very tuned into his family's finances, trying to do the best for his family. And we got into it. We were having a full teardown on financial planning, and he ended up pulling up his FIRE calculator, financial independence, retire early calculator. And I don't share this to make fun of him, but we looked at it, and effectively what it was doing is making linear projections based on variables that he put in. So, assuming a 7% market return on my retirement assets, if I put in, for him, it was about 10% of my income. It's like, okay, I'll have, 1.4 million. I'm starting to make up some numbers, but you get the gist. Oh, I'll have 1.4 million when I want to retire early. And then if we distribute at, you know, X rate, we won't run out of money. In fact, that money will grow. He's like, yeah, I mean, problem solved, right? And I was like, well, let me tell you about Monte Carlo analysis. And we had a good conversation that helped him think about things a little bit differently.
Yeah, so much of this, and I think that when people listen to their podcast, they start to realize that financial planning is pretty complex. And we know, even just from these social conversations, and also people who are coming, who have DIY'd their finances, or maybe they worked with another planner, or they have never even really addressed it with anyone, and we find all these mistakes. Like, it's not easy. So yeah, we're not trying to make fun of anybody, because there are specialties that we don't have, right? Don't ask me to do a surgery. So yeah, and so I think, also, one more thing I'll say is, people really like simple answers. Like yes, no, or you'll Google things like, hey, you should always put in 10% into your 401k, or you should do the 50-30-20 rule, right? Like needs, wants, and how much you should invest, or you should have X amount of your salary by age 30. Like all of these things that are really common on Google, people really like those kinds of answers. Um and I really want to give simple answers. It's just that when you want specific retirement planning, you have to do really specific analysis. And so that answer, it's just not going to be as simple as you think.
Yeah, actually, it reminds me of my jazz teacher when I was in high school used to always say, you know, teachers just have their phrases. His was garbage in, garbage out. And it is true. Like if you have general inputs, you're going to get fuzzy outputs. You have to have really specific inputs to get clear, simple outputs, right? Like the outputs of financial planning are actually simple answers, but they have very complex inputs to get that right output.
Right. Those calculators that Ben's friend was using, those are really common, or you'll see it in a Facebook fire group, or even just when you log in your 401k, there'll be like some basic calculator. If you input 3 things, it'll tell you everything you need to know about your retirement, which obviously isn't the case.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's just talk about let's just start with the model that we use.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think maybe even just another preface, right? Like I said at the start, every model's wrong. Some are useful. This model is more useful than linear projection, but you know, we're not trying to predict the future or, you know, turn the future into reality, but this creates a better foundation for us to make decisions from because we account for a lot more variables. So just taking it from the top, we use something called Monte Carlo analysis. So effectively what this is taking 1,000 scenarios, running them through a calculator, and spitting out the probability that the model has a successful output at the end of a client's life. You put a lot of variables in, and then we account for a lot of different variables that could happen, and then we tweak those up and down in different scenarios, or the system does it a lot faster than we can. We can kind of guide it from the top, and then based on all of those variables, we we start to outline where are the strengths and the weaknesses of the plan, where are the gaps that we need to fill, what action steps do we need to take to better guard against inflation, against a long-term care event, against investments performing poorly, the AI bubble bursting. Like these are all scenarios that we're running because we aren't trying to just create a single projection of the future, but rather say, what are 1,000 different ways the future could play out, and how are we successful or not successful based on those, you know, versions of the future.
Right, exactly. We're building in a lot of assumptions and a lot of variables into our calculator, if you will, for these simulations, and we're inputting, you know, healthcare inflation, general inflation. Are we retiring early? Okay, well, that means we're going to need to go to the marketplace for healthcare costs,
Mhm.
really specific things for the individual. Or hey, it makes sense to delay your Social Security benefits. Let's put that into the plan. And how does that change things? And do we need to draw more out of certain buckets first? Or, you know, it, it caked within every year, we need to make sure we're keeping up with the IRS, and if tax law is changing, just general publications that the IRS releases, and so it's all caked within a lot more. But these variables that we're inputting are uh, many and specific to the person. Like even down to the spending number. Some people want to spend more in retirement. They want to, go on more trips, or they want to retire earlier, and so we're getting really specific with some of these inputs.
Yeah, and some we'll do a separate episode on this, but sometimes we have to guard people against themselves too, because the type of spending that you are currently doing at maybe age 40 or 45 might not be the kind of spending you're doing at age 50, 55. So, so we don't always want to model the rosiest spending scenario for people too.
Yeah, so there's all these things that could change, right? The things we can't control, how long we live, what the market does, inflation, tax, like all these things that we can't control, but we want to model, if this goes wrong. So there's kind of that, we call it a stress test. And so we're stress testing for a lot of these things, but then we're also looking at someone's personal assets, right? Back to like, how should I add to my 401k? How should I, add to my other accounts? We're looking at all of their retirement assets, and we're saying, what's the most efficient way to withdraw which ones at specific times. I mean, there's a big difference from a tax perspective. There's different tax planning in retirement than when you are leaving the accumulation phase. And so how do we most effectively distribute someone's assets and when throughout the rest of the plan?
Right. And it's common in our planning scenarios, especially when we take on a new client, a lot of times we're making rather dramatic shifts because we're seeing large efficiencies that are to be made. But we talk about it in other episodes, but we also need to be mindful too that a financial plan isn't a single course correction and then you sail all the way to retirement and then look and see what we've done, but it's actually an iterative process, right? So you mentioned tax allocation management. We've had clients shift from pre-tax to Roth. We've shifted clients from Roth to pre-tax depending on where their income's at, where their future income is projected to be at, what their goals are. So there's a lot of reasons to tweak things after we start too. And I think that's also the value of having a model or a calculator that takes a lot of variables into account. The tax code just changed for 2026. That changes actual strategy for people. So, if you're not rerunning models as the reality of the future, emerges, then you're possibly missing out on really big efficiencies.
Right. And this is where I think of another story, because everybody wants a simple answer. Oh, well, when I get to to retirement, where should I withdraw from? And I'll tell you this, a lot of times, but not all the time, I like to have Roth assets sit longer than other assets. So have it be a bucket we don't withdraw from for a while, because tax-free growth, right? I want our aggressive assets in the Roth bucket, and I want that to grow tax-free as long as we can. Usually dollars we touch at the end, towards the end of the plan, because then we've maximized that tax-free growth. We've got, our more aggressive bucket, and we're growing, so those stocks can, increase and grow tax-free. But I think about this year and, thinking about that couple of clients, right? They're retired, and we actually recommend that they pull from Roth. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm. Yep, pulled from Roth because there's specific income limits and eligibility thresholds that we were trying to keep them underneath. Successfully trying, because we used Roth as a flexibility bucket earlier in life because there were dramatic, like 5-figure financial consequences of going over a limit.
Because of healthcare expenses.
Yeah. ACI premium subsidies.
Yep. And so we were trying to control their income that year, right? And if we stayed below this threshold, then they saved and they didn't even know this, but what was it, $10,000?
Yep, a little
A
over
year
$10,000
in healthcare
annual
premiums?
Yep.
Yeah. So a little over $10,000 a year for their healthcare premiums going forward, if we could just keep them under this certain threshold. So we said, oh, okay, well, because Roth doesn't affect your ordinary income, let's pull from there, instead of, we had been pulling from a couple other buckets.
Yeah. Oh, and actually, I mean, I mentioned as a general point earlier, but that I think underscores really nicely the imperative, I'll say, to run and rerun models based on legislative changes, because it was a big question mark as to what ACA subsidies would look like going into 2026 up until this summer. And there was still a question mark even after that if there might be like a last minute bill to extend the graded subsidies, but no. We're returning to cliff in 2026, and so there's really big financial consequences for ending up narrowly on one side or the other side of the cliff. So yeah, if you're not watching that or looking at that, you can run your plan off a cliff. I mean, in this couple's case, they were still going to retire, but with a lot more money paid in healthcare premiums if they weren't watching it. So
yeah, and so that's where it's an evolving relationship, and there's in-year analysis, but when we are inputting these variables into our simulation, into our calculator, we try to look as long-term as we can, but then also I just bring that story up because there is in-year analysis that we can change and modify, but we have to both look in-year and long-term, as far as we can, right? There's some things we don't have a crystal ball, but we can run really good analysis with inputting a variety of variables. And again, Monte Carlo, it'll crunch those numbers faster than I could punch in on a calculator, because it's showing 1,000 scenarios going wrong and giving you a percentage of success out of those 1,000 scenarios.
Yeah. So that's a good example of how it works in retirement, or how it can really help to be running these multiple analyses in retirement. we've also got a good story of how this can shape the way that you accumulate, right? Back to the original question of how much should I contribute to my 401k?
Well, yeah, we work with a lot of accumulators, and I think of multiple people come to mind right now. But just thinking about, oh, how much should I add to my 401k? In the accumulation phase, when we're running these long-term retirement analysis and projections, we were able to help. I think of this amazing mid-30 career, high-performing female client of ours, and she was doing an amazing job saving, but we were just saving in less desirable or efficient places. And so we were able just to reroute where she was saving, the different kinds of accounts, the different tax wrappers, different buckets for where she was accumulating. She's saving the same percentage, but we just changed, where that was actually going. Not just the investments, but we're talking, the tax wrapper, the account type. Um, and we were able to get her retiring in her 40s instead of 50s,
Mm.
with maintaining the same lifestyle number. And so I think that goes to show just there's extensive planning in the accumulation phase, and of course withdrawal phase gets complex as well. But so many clients I can think of who are really, really motivated. It's again, it's not a simple answer, but there are tactical things we'll do each year of like, hey, you know what, this year we actually need to change from Roth to pre-tax in your 401k. We're going to rebalance the investments. We're going to, add more to this brokerage account because we're on track to retire early. We're going to, everything just starts to come together. Or, hey, this change in the tax code, so we're going to, do this. Or, I think of clients too, just lifestyle changes. Hey, I know you want to take a sabbatical from work this year, so we're going to change a bunch of things. We're going to definitely switch, a couple different tax levers. We're going to maybe even implement a Roth conversion because we're going to be in a low income for this year. Or just different lifestyle changes that affect the plan and helping a client keep more of their money.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. I mean, we've said it before in other podcast episodes, but a lot of times you know, especially when you're younger and accumulating, you're not walking a razor thin line between, am I going to retire happily or am I not going to? It's more about, am I going to retire more flexibly with more money, with more ability to be generous, with time, treasure, talent, right? And so it's like good financial planning is about maximizing for many people. And it's fun and exciting to do that for people.
There's so many different stories that we could tell you, and examples, but I think, the goal of this podcast was just to run through a little bit of what's involved in Monte Carlo analysis and then how you actually think about that as a person, right? We're the brain driving the systems. We're using all these systems to support it. But how do we look in year, do in year analysis, and then try to extrapolate that and look long term? And I think that's the bottom line. And all of this revolves around someone's goals and what they want to accomplish. And we're just trying to help them soak up all the favorable strategies that we can and maximize the impact they have, the dreams they have. And so, yeah, I hope that this starts to paint a picture of what retirement planning can look like. And yeah, and if this is you and you're listening and you've used one of those online calculators or you want to get a little bit more specific, I would just come back to, yes, bespoke solutions really do require bespoke planning and detailed planning. And so you can reach out if this is you and it's resonating and you're thinking, wow, I do want to make sure that I am being as efficient as possible, maximizing, the time I have now in my accumulation phase, or I want to withdraw in a really specific, meaningful way.